Okay, this video is going to go over some of the NAT config stuff we're going to be doing in the lab this week. I'm going to be using Packet Tracer to do the video. I found out that there's a sniffer in Packet Tracer I'll be using, so we can look at the traffic on the outside of our network to see what the NAT's actually doing. So I attached that in Packet Tracer. If you want to do that, you can go down to In Devices, Sniffer, drag it out there, and then just connect your switch to the sniffer and the sniffer to the server. If you look at the sniffer, there's this GUI tab. By default, it shows it shows everything. I clicked Show None, and then went back and just clicked the stuff I wanted to see. So I wanted to see DNS, ICMP. Over here on MISC, I wanted to see HTTP. Let me drag that up some. Wanted to see HTTP, HTTPS, DNS. Already did DNS over there. Yeah, DNS. And I click TCP, DDP. If you don't do that, you'll probably see a bunch of extra stuff. So anyway, you hit the clear button. This shows some packets already captured when I was testing. You hit the clear button, that goes away. And then when you do something, like I'll ping for fun. When you ping, go over to the sniffer, and those pings show up. And if you click on them, you can look at the ping. So that's what I'll be doing in the podcast. In the lab, we will be doing other things to verify what we need to verify on the outside. But that's what I'm going to be using for this video. So if we look at our router config, I have already configured it for everything we need for the lab. I have my interfaces, I have my NAT, I have my access list. So if we go back up and quickly look at the things we need IPNAT outside on the outside interface, IPNAT inside on the two sub interfaces. We need a access list that matches our internal subnet, and then we need a NAT command that says, hey, I want the traffic to use the IP address of FA00, which is 99.2. So what should happen is my clients want to get out to the rich net, the internet, if you will. They go through the switch to the router matches the source IP address and says, hey, I need to NAT this traffic, and then sends it out. So if we go look at the sniffer, and if we look at this ping I just sent, we see that the source IP is 99.2, with 99.99.99.2, which is the IP address of the router. So the NAT command is currently working as expected. So that's how it should be working at this point. The lab sheet tells us to do some different things. First thing I'm going to do, though, is tell you a couple commands that might be helpful. Show IP NAT translations will show you your NAT table on the router. So this says, hey, 10.1.1.2, the source port was 10.25. It went out to port 80, and that matches up, so it can send the traffic back to the PC when it comes back. So if you want to clear that table, clear IP NAT translations, and then put a star, will clear everything. So now if we do show, it's empty. So that's good. So let's go ahead and do another ping. So we need to create a new entry in our table. Show. So now we see protocols ICMP. We have 4 pings. There's 4 entries in there. So that's what we need. We're going to change the way our NAT's working. So if we look at our NAT command, clear, that's not what I wanted. If we look at our NAT command down here, right now it's telling it to use the fast Ethernet 00 interface for the NAT. If you have multiple IP addresses available to you like we do in the lab, you might want to use something else. So we're going to go through the process of what you need to do to tell it to use something else. We're also going to change our source list to be more specific. So those are just some of the things we're going to do. Probably want to make sure both PCs work before you proceed too far. So I'm going to go ahead and clear my sniffer so I can look at the traffic from this host to make sure it's getting the correct IP address. And if we look at one of these packets, the source is 99.99.99.2. So that's what we're supposed to be doing. So let's go look at the lab sheet. See what we're supposed to do next. So, okay, the first thing we're going to do is create a new access list that's more specific. So if we go back and look at our access list on the router, this says 10.1.1.0, 0.0.0.255. So that allows the entire range of addresses from 1.0 to 1.255, but we're only going up to 1.191. So not a big deal, probably not, doesn't matter, but just for fun, we're going to get rid of this access list and put another one in. I said in the lab sheet you should probably clear the IP NAT translations before you make any changes, because sometimes you get errors. But you can try it if you want. So we'll get rid of this access list. To show run. So the access list is gone. So now in theory, if I go try, it's going to fail because I don't have the NAT properly and completely configured. So yeah, that's going to fail. So now I'm going to go back and create the access list. Access list 1, permit. But this access list I'm going to create is going to be specific for the subnet we're talking about. And you should have watched the access list podcast by now to learn about the wildcard mask. So that is the wildcard mask for the network size we're using. And then I'm going to create one for VLAN 3. And that's how I need to create the access list. So now if I show my running config, we have a 2-line access list that matches traffic, and it's going to get the IP address of the interface. So in theory, it should work now. All right, hey, that worked. Let's go look at our sniffer again. We'll go down to the bottom to see the most recent pings. And it's working again. So that worked. Let's try the VLAN 2, VLAN 3 PC. Hey, that worked as well. And the IP address it's getting is still 99.2. So that's cool. So the next thing I said we should do is we're going to change the IP address that is being used for the NAT. So instead of using the router IP, we're going to pick one of those other IPs that exists in our network. And so we're going to need to get rid of this command, and then we're going to need to put a new command in, and we need to create a NAT pool for that. But first I want to go ahead and try to get rid of that command to show you what will happen if you try to get rid of a NAT that's being used. Oh, that didn't work. Apparently I took too long. Let's try this again. So I'm going to put this NAT back on. I'm going to go use that NAT. I'll use the browser this time. Those NATs seem to last longer. All right. And now I'm going to go to the router and try to get rid of that NAT. Never mind. Earlier I was testing. It was telling me, oh, you can't get rid of that NAT because it's currently in use. But now apparently it doesn't care about that. So anyway, if you get an error that says you can't delete that NAT, it's currently in use, then you need to clear the NAT table. But apparently it doesn't care. So we're going to create a NAT pool. I'm going to call it Outbound -3 because we're going to use 99.99.99.3 as our IP address for the NAT. You could create a pool that consumes many addresses, create like 10 addresses, but we're just going to use one single address. So we're going to make the start and end address the same. And then we need to tell it a net mask, and we have a 27-bit net mask on our outside interface. So we'll use that for the net mask. Right, so that creates the NAT pool. And then we want to create the actual NAT command to tell it to use that pool. So now we put this command in, and we called it Outbound -3. 3, and I spelled, I need a space, not there. So now we have the same command. We're still referencing list 1, and we're creating a pool. We tell it to use the pool Outbound -3. We're still doing overload. So now if I try to get out there, if I refresh my page and go check the sniffer, right now if we look at the source address, now the source is coming from 99.3. So that may not seem very exciting to you at this point, but now you know how to use an IP address other than your router for the NAT. So the outbound traffic is getting 99.3. So the next thing I wanted to do, well, we'll test it over here too. from VLAN 3. VLAN 3, 99.3. So the next thing I want to do, let me go make sure what the lab sheet says. I hate it when I get all off. Yeah, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to edit our access list 1. And we're going to get rid of the second entry. I happen to know the second entry is going to have a sequence number of 20 because I know things like that. And now we're going to look at what we have. Show run, do show run. And we look at my access list. I only match the first VLAN, VLAN 2. All right, so now this one's going to work still. That one's going to work. But now currently my VLAN 3 PC does not have an access list that matches it, so it's not going to work. So what we want to do now for fun is we're going to create a new access list called 2. And we're going to write it to match our other subnet. And we're going to create a new NAT pool, outbound 20. Just for fun, we'll skip up some addresses. We'll use 99.99.99.20 for this NAT. Net mask, overload. No, we don't need the overload. And then we're going to create a new NAT, IP NAT inside source list 2 pool outbound. I called it outbound 2. I wanted to call it outbound 20, but whatever. We'll use outbound 2 because that's what I named it. I intended to name that outbound 20, but apparently I can't type. And we still want the overload. So now if I go clear the sniffer and I generate traffic from this host, hopefully it'll work. I ran into this when I was testing. At one point my changes were being ignored by the simulator. So after a while that started working. Show IP NAT translations. So I have no translations in there. Yeah, so this should be working. Well, let me go look at my config and make sure. Oh, that should be working. I messed up my access list. Good job, Rich. How many of you guys are sitting saying, hey, Rich, you messed up your access list. That's not right. All right, so my access list was messed up, so I need to fix that. And once I fix that access list, now hopefully my ping will work as expected. Hey, check that out. If we go over here and look at the sniffer, then we see that my pings are coming from 99.20. So that is what we're looking at in the first part of NAT. Basically, to help you understand the different ways we can implement outbound NAT, what the access list actually does, how to create an access list that has multiple entries, and also how to use a pool for specifying the IP address that you get NATed to, and also how to use multiple different pools for different subnets. So that's what we're doing for the first part of the NAT.